What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. I missed you guys so much. My name is Cray, I think. And today, guess what we're going over? Can you guys guess? Oh gosh, it almost fell. 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan B. Peterson. Now, I've read this book before, and I was thinking, okay, I'll just do like a book review of like the entire thing. But if any of you have ever listened to Jordan B. Peterson talk for 3 seconds, you know that he has a lot to say, and he says it very fancily. So it didn't quite work out. So I'm just going to do a chapter a week. So this week we're starting chapter 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. And he starts his book, how I think all good books start, talks about lobsters. All right. And if you like lobsters as much as I do, you know that lobsters have a dominance hierarchy, right? And so, you know, the strong lobster on top, bottom, the not strong lobster is on the bottom. And something he does is like he'll like present a bunch of ideas, and you're like, what's this dude talking about? And then he ties it all in like the last 2 pages. But he starts out with lobsters and the dominance lobsters the dominance hierarchy the lobsters have. And so he talks about how one male lobster will fight another male lobster, right? To establish the stronger one, right? And the higher you go up on the dominance hierarchy, right? Basically, the more lobsters you defeat, right? As you are a lobster yourself, you get better shelter, you get better food, and you get access to mating, right? Because female lobsters don't want to mate with the beta lobsters. They want to mate with the alpha lobsters. And then just dominance, right? And so he talks about how like lobsters actually fight. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Just like imagine lobsters fighting, and that's kind of what he takes 3 pages to describe. But if a lobster loses, there's chemicals in their brain, one called octomapine, and that's released whenever it loses, and it actually, lobsters, like the betas they are, adopts, like if you lose, you adopt a new lowly subordinate position, right? So whenever octomapine is released, not you, unless you're a lobster, the lobsters feel defeated, inhibited, drooping. Their brains literally change, so they think of themselves less, right? However, if they win, right, like the alpha lobster you are, your brain releases serotonin, right, which is actually found in humans. Octomapine is not found in humans as much as, or in insignificant qualities as serotonin. Serotonin has a pretty similar carryover effect. Like it pretty much does the same thing between lobsters and humans. Basically, it stabilizes mood and produces well-being, happiness. It's like the feel good, right? So whenever lobsters win, they produce that, and so they're more likely to win in the future because of they're feeling alpha, right? And then so this is what I was talking about earlier. So he'll like talk about just like random things, and you're like, what is this guy on? But then he brings it back together. And so this is one of the random things he talks about, positive feedback loops, which is actually pretty interesting. And the example he uses is agoraphobia, which is basically when you're afraid to like leave your house, right? And so he describes basically how he's okay. So the big thing, he's a psychologist, and so he describes how it typically might happen, right? So there's like a woman or a guy might have, oh gosh, okay, I'm not editing that out. Okay, so guy, girl, they lose a family member, they lose a parent, they lose something that they're reliant on, right? And then they go to, like, the example he uses, like, they go to the mall, right? and they used to go to the mall with this friend, this relative, the spouse, or whatnot, and it's busy, and they're not able to find what they want, and their heart starts to beat, and they start to feel frantic, they start to feel scared, and then they have a panic attack, right? And so you'll go to the hospital, and the doctors check you out. There's nothing wrong, right? You don't have any. It was a mental thing. There's not anything physically wrong with you, right? And then a couple weeks later, you have to go to the mall to get something again. But whenever you get to the mall, you remember how you felt the last time, and you start feeling like that again. And then you start associating the mall with that panic, or with the panic, right? And then once you associate the mall with that, you're like, I can't go to the mall anymore. But then you go to a department store, or you go to a grocery store, and you remember how you felt at the mall, and then you start feeling that way at that place. And then pretty soon you can't go to a gas station, or a fruit stand, right? People don't go to fruit stands anymore, without feeling completely scared. And so you stay home because you've associated all these other places with panic. And then eventually you're too scared to be at home, right? But you can't go anywhere else, right? And so basically, the idea of a positive feedback loop is that you continue to build. So you're building, right? So it starts at the mall, and then it goes to the grocery store, and then it goes to your grandmother's house, and then it goes to the gym, and then it goes to church, and then it goes, right? So it builds, right? Boop, 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 boop. And so and then and then he goes back to the serotonin, but he talks about it in humans, right? So if you slump around, right, and so he's talking about humans, right? So if you slump around, if you don't have a high view of yourself, other people will notice that, right? Or okay. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm mentioning it now. If you're still watching right now, just say just comment you're stupid. Heart. Okay. Your stupid heart. Comment it right now, and like the video, please. Okay. This is what I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to be presenting what he thinks. These aren't my ideas, and then I'll present my ideas later. So my job right now is just to give you a concise summary of what he's talking about in a less confusing way. So not my ideas. These are his, right? These are his. So he argues, right, if you slump around like a beta lobster, others and other people in yourself will actually see that, and they'll notice that, and they'll start to assign you, and you'll start to assign yourself lower on the dominance hierarchy, or lower self-esteem, right? And because you're assigning yourself lower and lower, you're not producing as much serotonin. So just like you get more scared and more scared and more scared and more scared, you view yourself less and less and less and less. So that's kind of how the positive feedback loop ties in. But scientifically, right, in human brains, if you produce less serotonin, right, you're more anxious, you're sad, less likely to stand up for yourself, and that's a big one. Decreases probability of good shelter, being like a home, because you don't view yourself as competent, right? So you're not competent to hold a productive job, so you can't afford something. You're not competent enough to manage your own finances, right? Because you're so low, so you don't have a lot of resources, and you don't have a partner or a spouse because you're not competent enough to interact with the opposite gender, right? Because I'm not saying you are not competent, I'm saying because you assign yourself so low, and you're more likely to abuse drugs, and your increased susceptibility to heart disease, cancer, and dementia, right? So by continuing to lower yourself, right, you're actually there are actual negative side effects that happen, psychologically and physically as well. And so this is kind of where he ties everything in. So he says you might actually be at the bottom, right? So he's saying you might actually be at the bottom of the hierarchy. Often you're not. You just view yourself as the bottom. But he's saying like, hey, sometimes you are at the bottom, but if you start to straighten up, then people will start to look at and treat you differently. By standing up straight with your shoulders back, you begin to accept the responsibility of life with eyes wide open. And so something he talks about through the entire book is this idea of being with a B. And I'm going to read this, and you're going to realize, or you're just going to like, this is what he sounds like the entire book, all right? So he says, I use the term being with a capital B in part because of my exposure to the ideas of the 20th century German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Heidegger tried to distinguish between reality as conceived objectively and the totality of human experience, which is his being. Being with a capital B is what each of us experiences subjectively, personally, and individually, as well as what we each experience jointly with others. As such, it includes emotions, drives, dreams, visions, and revelations, as well as our private thoughts and perceptions. Being is also, finally, something that is brought into existence by action, so its nature is, to an indeterminate degree, a consequence of our decisions and choices, something shaped by our hypothetically free will. Yeah. Construed in this manner, being is one, not something easily and directly reducible to the material and objective, and two, something that most definitely requires its own term, as Heidegger labored for decades to indicate. So that sounds like nothing, right? It sounds like this guy's a nerd. He is a nerd. But the idea of being is just I think it's basically just existing as yourself. So you have your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own actions, and all that good stuff, right? And you're alive, right? You're living. And so something he talks about, I'll read it. I think this is the last line of the chapter, but he says, like I said, by standing up straight with your shoulders back, you begin to accept the responsibility of life with eyes wide open. And so something he talks about later throughout the book is this idea of the burden of being, right? So because you exist, there will inevitably be burden in your life, right? And I think that's true. I think bad things happen, right? And so what he's saying is the bad things, they're going to come, but if you stand up straight with your shoulders back, you're embracing and accepting that they're coming, and you're facing with eyes wide open. So instead of being afraid, you're accepting the responsibility of life, right? The burden of being. And now we get to what I think about it. And I think for the most part, he's right. I think next chapter, I disagree with him on very heavily. But this chapter, not so much. I think bad things happen in life, and I think we're called to be courageous and we're called to be strong. But this is where I kind of disagree with him a little bit. You can only strengthen yourself so much, right? It's God who gives us strength. And so I just have a couple of Bible verses that I was looking at and thinking about. So Psalm 27:14 says, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage, wait for the Lord. So we can ourselves be strong and let our heart take courage, but we do it because we're waiting on the Lord, right? So I think I agree. I think we have the capacity to accept the responsibility of life by being strong, but there comes a point where I think that sometimes God gives us things that I think often God gives us things that we can't actually handle. Why? Because we're supposed to be relying on Him. Right. 2 Timothy 1:7, classic. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline, right? God's given us a spirit of power. It's not our spirit. We didn't have it before, right? But whenever we become Christians, right? Whenever we say, Jesus, you're my Lord, rule my life, be king over my life. God, I give it to you. God gives us a spirit of power, right? So we don't have it before. We have some capacity to be strong, right? But it's God who says, it's God who gives us the Holy Spirit, right? And he gives us a spirit of power. So without him, without God, we don't have that spirit, right? 1 Corinthians 16:13. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, right? So we're called to stand firm, we're called to be courageous, to be strong, we're called to stand up straight with our shoulders back. But it's God who gives us the strength. It's not of our own volition, right? I forgot. I think this is in Hebrews. I forgot the address. But keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. What can man do to me? Right? And I think at the end of the day, that's where we're supposed to live. We're supposed to live it. The Lord is my helper. God is with me. What can man do to me? What can Satan do to me? What can happen to me whenever God is my helper, right? And the idea is, like, look at Job, right? Bad things happen, but we still hope in God. God still, his mercies are new every morning, right? God's the one who gives us the strength. God's the one who sustains us, right? And so we have some strength, but we're not meant to rely on ourselves. We weren't created to rely on ourselves. We were created to rely on God. And so God has blessed us, right? And gives us the strength, gives us the courage, gives us the wisdom to stand up straight with our shoulders back. But we can't do it alone. We need him. Why? Because he's God. And so that's where I'm going to end today. If you liked the video, like it. Oh, frick. I almost like it. I already have the next chapter of this kind of worked up, and I actually really enjoy this book. It's interesting just because he presents, like, it's his, like this book is almost his worldview. This is how he sees the world. And so there's some things I agree on, there's some things I disagree on. I agree. I think we have to, especially in this world as Christians, right, in the time and place we're living in, we need to stand straight with our shoulders back. We need to stand firm in the faith. We need to be confident. We need to be strong, right? But this strength comes from God. And yeah, like at the end of the day, the strength comes from God. So like I said, if you like the video, like the video. I'm planning on doing this entire book. Like I said, I already have the next one. Please check out my other videos. I'm really trying to annihilate Caleb Fechner. And if you have made it this far in the video, I know there's like 20 seconds left, 30 seconds left. Comment Caleb Fechner in the comments, because I'm coming for him. All right, I love y'all, and until I see you again, much love.